Welcome to Learning Photography with Duck. Here's your host, Duck.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining me once again to another episode of Learning Photography with Duck. I am your host, Duck, and we got a pretty good session today, I think. Before we start that, let me get my customary, little heads up. First things first, if you are a Patreon member, if you're a member of my Patreon group, you will be receiving, if you haven't already, a little blurb about next week's session, which is for Patreon members only. The topic of discussion is copyright and licensing for photographers. So hopefully I will dispel some myths and give you a little bit of background information, not only on copyright, but if you are interested in selling your photography, you need to understand licensing rights as well. So I will get into that. And if you are not a Patreon member, I encourage you to help support what I do here with my teaching. You can do it as low as $5 a month. And just, go to patreon.com, learn photography with Duck. Also, you can see here, I got 2 events coming up with Milford Photo. The first one is Beginner's Photo Walk. This is definitely for beginner photographers, which most of you don't fall into that category. But it's on Saturday, September 11th in the morning, and you can sign up through Milford Photo for that. And then in October, Tuesday, October 5th, in the evening, I'm doing a Zoom session where I discuss going beyond the rule of thirds. And that is explaining some of the other rules that we use as photographers. Because a lot of times when you're first starting off as a photographer, the first rule they teach you is the rule of thirds. And if you look through your viewfinder, you're going to see the rule of thirds grid. So a lot of times what happens is the beginner kind of gets stuck in that and they don't advance beyond that. So I will be taking you beyond the rule of thirds, explaining other rules of composition, as well as some of the psychology behind some of the composition rules. So again, that's through Milford Photo. You can go ahead and sign up for that on Milford Photo's meetup page. Okay. So hopefully we'll see you at one of those. All right. So today is photography Q&A. So basically, anything that you want to ask me about, your camera, lighting, tripods, and even editing, it's not out of the realm. Okay. So just to start off, Donna had asked me a question on the Facebook group in anticipation of possibly not being able to attend tonight's meeting. But as we see here, she is here. And so I am going to open up the questioning with her. And what was your question, Donna?
So I hike a lot, like Bill, and I can never get. We're always in and out of the sun, the shade, trees, trails going out. Sunshine, no problem. But when I'm in the shade and the trees, and most of the shots that I like to get are candid, so it's not like I have time to fiddle with all the settings. But I've been told to use aperture priority, and I've tried that, but I want usually a fairly decent depth of field. So if I use something that's going to give me a decent depth of field, the shutter speed is so slow, the picture blurs. If I use shutter priority somewhere around F11, F12, maybe, not F11, but like around 100, 125, 150, which I think most times will stop the action, the depth of field is super shallow. So if I'm not exactly on point, I don't get the picture I want. Or even if I get the exact subject I want, everything else is blurred, and I really prefer it to be more crisp.
Mm-hmm.
So, trying to find the best setting, and if I bump up the ISO, they come out green. And they just don't look nice. So I'm trying to find something that will work.
Okay. How would you describe the oops, somebody's phone. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, if you could just mute your microphone for a second, if it's barking. All right. So my first question would be I assume you're hiking during the day, correct?
Yes.
And so you're dealing with not just the light of the day, but also the light in the shadow of the trees, and oftentimes probably very mottled lighting.
Yeah, most times.
Okay. And what is your typical ISO that you shoot at during these events?
I've tried a bunch of different things. I like to keep it like around 400 or 500. I find 800 isn't too bad, but if I go up over that, it comes out like really. So I like to keep it lower if possible.
Okay. Yeah, I don't feel you need to go beyond 800. All right. And then the other question I have is, what kind of lens do you normally shoot with when you're hiking?
I have the camera I have is the Olympus Mark III.
Okay.
And I have the 14-150 on it.
14 to 150? Is that what you said? All right. So you have a wide range.
Correct.
Okay. All right. One of the things that I explain to people, first off, when it comes to ISO, is don't be afraid of high ISOs if it means you're going to get your shot. All right? Because the alternative is that you're not going to get a shot. And then, of course, you're going to miss out on all the photographic opportunities. There are plenty of softwares out there to help control noise. So don't let that be that stopping point for you. Okay. However, in typical shade, I don't feel you need to go above 800 ISO in order to get a shot. Okay. What you need to do is you need to find that balance. All right. Now, one more question for you. Are you shooting JPEG or RAW?
Oh, I have it doing both.
Okay.
Because you told me to do both at the last time.
I said do both until you're comfortable. All right. And then switch over to RAW, because you can create JPEGs from your RAWs.
Right.
Okay. The other thing that I often suggest to people when they're starting to learn exposure is learn to read your histogram. And a lot of times, people have a hard time understanding how the histogram works. But once you get used to understanding what you're looking at with a histogram, you're going to be able to judge your exposure a lot better, especially when you're dealing with mixed light, so going from something that's bright and then suddenly going into shadow. All right. Now, I can feel your pain, because dealing with constantly changing light situations can be very, very frustrating. And as I've told people, when I'm out on the field, I tend to be rather lazy about it, about my photography, meaning that I don't want to spend an extra amount of effort if I can avoid it. Right? So I tend to set my camera up in a way that simplifies things for me out in the field. So, for example, my color profile, I keep it to Canon standard, which is fairly flat. or Canon neutral, all right? Because I know I'm going to be making changes when I bring it into Lightroom, okay? So it's little things like that. The other thing I do is I don't worry about color temperature. Again, it's one of those things that I will change once I bring it in. So I tend to keep everything on the shade mode, all right? Unless I'm shooting with a flash, then I'll put it on flash mode, simply because if I show somebody the back of my camera, they're going to see something that kind of sort of resembles what they're expecting to see, rather than, you know, a really blue or some funky colored image, all right? Not understanding that, you know, I don't care about things like that, all right? But that's kind of beside the point. But to get to your point, what you need to do is find your exposure range from the bright area to the shadow area. And you have to kind of commit this to memory at the time of shooting, right? Because obviously different days, different lighting experiences are going to change, all right? But as long as you are in a particular lighting environment, that light isn't really going to change drastically unless, you know, the weather changes. And what I mean by this is, you know, you're out on a hike for, let's say, an hour, okay? And if it's bright sun, it's going to be bright sun for that hour, all right? And when that light is in the shade, that shade light is going to be the same during that whole entire hour. So now, as you're shooting, you have two lighting situations to kind of wrangle. One, when the subject is in the full sun, and a second one when the subject is in shadow. What I normally do is I'll put mine on aperture priority, simply because I want to control that depth of field, all right? So you mentioned that you want to keep it to a certain depth of field without going too crazy about it, all right? I don't think F8 or even F11 is going to do you any justice for your images as compared to something maybe like a 4.5 or 5.6. Because you have to understand that your depth of field kind of helps tell the story. All right, and while you're hiking, yes, you know, the sense of place is part of the equation, but that background, the way I look at it, doesn't need to be, you know, super sharp in order to tell that story, because the trees next to the subject are similar to the trees in the background. All right. So actually, let me ask you what kind of photos you normally take on these events.
I usually like to get the people, so like if someone's climbing up some rocks in front of me, or going down a hill, or, you know, the side of something. Usually it's people doing something other than just walking.
Right.
And, you know, they're not just sitting. It's rare that I take, I won't say rare, but my preference is to take people doing what they do to tell the story.
Yeah, so action shots.
Right.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So in this case, the setting itself isn't the major motivating force behind the image. It's the person attempting, you know, an obstacle, or maybe it's a group of people. They're chit chatting. They're enjoying their each other's company, and you want to capture that. So. Right. It's very people-centric. So the goal is to have the people in relatively good exposure. And whatever happens to the background, it really shouldn't matter. because the background isn't really telling the story. It's the subject that tells that story. Okay? The background just gives it a sense of place. That being said, obviously, we don't want a background that completely blows out, and to bright light, or vice versa, goes into black. All right. But, from what you've described, I don't feel that you're going to find those two extremes unless you're shooting somebody who is backlit, or somebody who, pretty much, or somebody who is front lit while the rest of them behind them is in shadow. All right. That's when you're going to get the extreme contrast of light. Okay. But even with extreme contrast of light, I find that there is a middle ground. All right. So how do we deal with this? One of the things that I've done is in aperture priority mode. Okay. I have my shutter control, my aperture control. All right. So what I'm doing is I'm telling the camera I want to shoot at, let's say, f8. So my dial is going to control my aperture, and that tells the camera what aperture I want it to pay attention to. All right. And then I've already established that I'm going to shoot at a very specific ISO. All right. And depending on how bright the light is, all right, because it's shade, I'll usually start off at 400. And if I need to move up from there, I'll move up, 600, 700, 800. All right. And I know that even at 800, most cameras can handle that really, really well without getting too grainy. Okay. So that's two settings that I've already set for the camera. My ISO, which is set for the light, and my aperture, which is set for how I want to tell the story. All right. And I usually don't even go as high as f8. I'll usually stay somewhere around 4.5, 5.6. And that tends to give me enough information in the background to let the viewer know what is happening in relation to the subject. Okay? So that means the camera is going to then dictate what the shutter speed is. All right? And that's going to be based on how it meters the situation. Okay? So now we get into the technical aspect. And I'm going to ask you another question. How do you have your camera set to meter? Do you know?
No, I don't.
Is it spot?
That's not something I'm familiar with at all.
Okay. So the camera is going to meter in several ways. All right. And it's going to be dependent on how much of the area of the screen it's going to use to meter. All right. So it goes everything from the smallest, like 5 to 10% of the screen, which is called center point metering. Mm-hmm. Okay. All the way up to evaluative metering, which basically takes the entire screen. Right, and there are variations in between. There are modes where it will concentrate the majority on the center, which is called center weighted. So it'll use the center part of your frame as the major part of the equation, but still factor in the edges as part of it. Okay, and what I find is each one of those meter readings is going to give you something a little bit different because of the light that is influencing those parts of the scene. All right. So, for example, your background has a very bright upper half and a very mid-tone lower half. So what happens is the camera wants to turn everything into that middle gray. And it looks at your scene and says, well, we got this kind of middle gray on the lower part, but we have this very light gray at the top. I'm going to find the average of those two. So what happens is your sky suddenly becomes a little bit darker and your ground becomes a little bit darker. All right, because it's trying to compensate for all that bright light in the upper area. Okay? So one of the things that I do, all right, and this is just me because this works for me, is I keep my metering to spot metering. And it's only going to use 5% of my screen. So that way I tell the camera whatever I am pointing that spot at, that's what it's going to meter, regardless of any additional light that's coming in around my scene. And this may be useful for you in that mottled light where you get spots of bright intermixed with shadow. And what I would do is I would meter the shadow area, all right, and take a shot, all right? And that's going to give me an exposure, all right, because the camera's going to say, oh, based on that little bit of shadow under this lighting condition with this exposure, with this ISO and this aperture, we get this shutter speed, okay? Now, if I turn around and shoot it and point at something that's bright, it's going to compensate for that and give me a different shutter speed, all right? So what you have to understand is that in situations like this, let the camera do what it's got to do, all right? Don't try to chase the exposure, all right? But there are a couple things that you will want to pay attention to, all right? For example, I take the camera and I point it at something that is bright, all right? So I look at the situation and says, okay, if I run ahead of this group of people, they're walking towards me, the sun is on their face, all right? I'm going to meter the exposure for them, all right? And I'm going to click, take a shot, and then chimp it on the back of the camera, all right? And I'm going to see, is that a proper exposure, okay? If it's not, you might need to, drop the exposure down a little bit, and we'll get to that in 1 second. But you want to see where you stand, all right? You need a baseline. All right. And that shot of them in the sun is going to provide that baseline. Then you're going to turn in the opposite direction where the shadow is. You're going to meter for that shadow and you're going to, again, take a shot. And that's going to give you your baseline for your shadow. And you're going to look at the exposure there. Okay. And you're going to say, okay, well, if my subject is in bright sun, all right, it's looking a little hot, all right, but you can look at the histogram and you can say, all right, well, it looks a little hot in the display, but I'm looking at my histogram and the histogram isn't quite all the way pushed up to the right-hand side, so that tells me I'm okay, all right? So that means when the meter is reading 0 as you're pointing into the light, you can go ahead and take all the shots you want and you're going to be good. Okay? When I turn to the shadow side, you're going to look at it and it says, okay, well, in this situation, they're definitely looking underexposed. Okay? And this is usually where the problem lies. All right, because in order to regain shadow, we need to amplify the signal in post-production. We need to raise our shadows. All right, so we are artificially raising the exposure in that area, and that's going to show off any grain a lot more. So what we want is we want to be able to bring our shadows down instead of having to raise it up. Okay? Thank you. So when we shift over to the shadow, all right, and take a shot, and he says, okay, it's underexposed. At this point, we need to tell the camera, don't shoot at that exposure. I want you to add another stop of light. And I'm going to use a stop as an example, right? And the way you do that, if you're not familiar with, all right, this top dial or your initial dial controls your aperture when you're in aperture priority. Your secondary dial, sometimes it's, where your thumb is. Sometimes it might be the dial on the back, all right? Sometimes it's a combination of pushing your exposure compensation button, which is that button that's kind of like a square that's half white, half black with a plus and minus. Sometimes it's a combination of pressing that while turning that top dial, all right? Every camera is different. You have to find out what it is, right? What this does is it tells the camera, whatever exposure you find, I want you to add another stop of light. So we are modifying our exposure, okay? This is exposure compensation, all right? So we're compensating for the low light by telling the camera, add more light, okay? And, of course, it's going to slow the shutter down a little bit. All right, and we'll get to that in a second, okay? But what I want you to do is keep that in mind and say, okay, when I'm shooting into the sun, I can be in just regular aperture priority mode. But as soon as somebody goes into the shadow, I need to make sure that I turn that dial down one stop or up one stop, whatever it is, and then shoot. All right. And then pretty much that's going to be the only change you have to make, regardless of what the camera's telling you for shutter. Typically, that's going to solve a good portion of your problem. All right. It gets a little more technical than that. All right. And I'm going to take this in steps, okay? Now, obviously, you want to be within a certain shutter speed range. You don't want to be so that the shutter is too slow that you can't handhold, okay? But you're shooting a 14 to, what was 150? What was 150? Okay. 14 to 150. When you're wide open, you really don't have much to concern yourself because you're going to be able to shoot very slow with a wide field of view. All right, at a 14 millimeter. All right, the rule of thumb is whatever your millimeters are, you don't want to be below that in your shutter. So at 14 millimeters, you don't want to be below 1/20th of a second. And 1/20th of a second is pretty slow. All right? So long as, of course, you can keep yourself fairly steady. All right? If you're hiking and you're moving and you're trying to stop the action while the other people are also moving, obviously that's going to present other problems, okay? But as long as you can get yourself rooted and planted, and tucked in, or even lean up against a tree, all right, and take your shot at 14 millimeters, you can shoot at a really slow speed and not worry about it. Okay, it's when you go to the other end at 1/50th, at 150 millimeter, that becomes a problem. But if you're in a fairly tight knit group, I don't see you shooting at 150 millimeter unless they're lagging way back there.
Yeah, generally no. But then even if I go that slow, like we're in a tight group and I see someone climbing up and I want to get them climbing or jumping down or something, if I'm going that slow, I get a big work, right? It's not stopping the action. Even close enough to me to get in.
So at 150 millimeter, the rule of thumb is you want to shoot at 150th of a second or higher.
Right.
But if there's any kind of movement, that kind of goes out the window because you want to stop the movement, all right? And the rule of thumb in that situation is you want to be at double whatever your lens is, all right? So 150 would be 300. So you won't want to shoot at anything slower than 1/300th of a second.
All right. So like if I'm sitting, like if we're close and I'm shooting at, let's say 25, right? I would want to go 50 is still going to blur my action, right?
Not necessarily. All right. Again, it's because most hikers they're not going breakneck speed, unless maybe they're tumbling down a hill.
And those are the best ones to catch.
And those are the best ones to catch. But then at that point, you want the blur in order to show movement. All right. You want that dust flying and the feet flying, and
Yeah.
All kidding aside, again, it's finding that balance of motion blur and stability. Okay.
Compromise. Photography's compromise.
It is definitely, absolutely, very much so.
You got to figure out what's important to you, like you said. Regardless of what your ISO is, you get the shot that you want, and then you can deal with that higher ISO if it happens to be that way later.
Okay.
Right.
A bunch of compromises. Someone jumping off a rock or climbs up and they jumped off a rock. That's probably taking 250 or 500 in a second, no matter what my lens was set at. Just here again, to stop that motion, you get them jumping off the rock in midair. To stop the motion in midair for one shot anyway.
Right.
And you can tell the story of the motion from that. But anyway, it's a bunch of compromises. And then on the other hand too is that I use three different packages of software. Okay, I don't just use Lightroom. So when I'm shooting, I know what software packages I have. I know what I can do with them. I shoot entirely differently than before I knew how to do all that.
Okay.
Yes, and Alan brings up a good point that I was going to get into is understanding not only just the fundamentals of exposure, but also understanding the physics behind your camera and your camera lens and what it can do, all right? And also understanding what you can do in post-production, all right? So I covered what you should look out for in terms of your lens, and you have some base numbers as far as setting your... making sure your settings are appropriate to the action you're taking. All right.
Right.
So, for example, f8 probably not the most ideal aperture to be at. Okay. So what I would do is either go through all your images. All right. And pick out all the different values. All right, look at all the pictures that were shot at f8. All right, and then you can do this very simply in Lightroom. Do a filter for all the aperture at f8 and take a look at those. All right, then refilter for like 5.6. All right, which I tend to find is a happy medium for a lot of event photography that I do. Okay. And take a look at those, all right, and see how does my background look with those aperture settings. And if you're not seeing a big difference, or you're not seeing a difference one way or the other that affects your storytelling, and you say, okay, well, I'm shooting at f8. But it's not adding any more information to the storytelling than 5.6, but I'm robbing myself of light, then I know I don't need to shoot at f8 when 5.6 can do the exact same job and get me an extra stop of light, all right?
Okay.
Because you have to understand your situation, all right? Most of the time, you're taking a photo of a person, and what is important to that story is what is happening immediately around them. It's very seldom what's 2 miles up the ways, because you can't even see that far. All right, so f8, f11 is not going to give you any more information than f5.6 would. All right? Yeah.
While you were talking, I went through some height pictures. I always do height pictures at 5.6.
Mm-hmm.
Can I show them to you just so you can see what it looks like with 5.6?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, go ahead and share.
Let me share. Let's see if I share. Let's do. I haven't shared in a long time. Let's see if this works. Do you see my desktop?
Yep, absolutely.
Yep.
All right, let me move this out of the way so I can get to that.
And
These were taken on a hike. Well, also, in all fairness, I've done this hike before with this group. This group tends to be fussy about pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Donna, you've never seen
It's a big group.
Yeah, you've never seen me with my good camera because Dennis is not that fussy, and I don't feel like carrying a heavy camera. This group's a little fussier, and they know my reputation, where the New York people don't know me that well. But this is at 0.8, and I think this I tested ahead of time because I knew I was going to take a group picture, and I took a picture in this spot, and I knew what the sun was. Unfortunately, this was a day where you had sun, and as you can see, some people are hot on one side and in the shadow on the other. You can't help that. And but this is 5.6 because we really don't care that much about the background.
Right.
We care about the people, but you know what the woods are anyways. And plus, I feel it gives it a little depth. Let's say you were taking a picture of a bunch of people in a trail. If you have 20 people in a row, 10 people in a row, even 7 people in a row, if that last person is not sharp, that's okay, because to me, it gives it a little bit of depth. And as I'm explaining this, I'm telling you, and Doug, you've been on one of my calls with this, I'm telling you what works for me. It may not work for somebody else. But these pictures that were taken out by the road, I took at ISO 200.
Yeah.
And you will see how it is with ISO 200 and 5.6.
Right. But the thing is, it's the depth of field here. All right. So if this is 5.6, the thing you have to understand about any depth of field is you have to be conscious of the camera to subject distance, and then the subject to background distance. All right. In this particular image, Bill is fairly distant from the group in order to get the entire group in there. So his depth of focus is pretty wide for 5.6. Had he been closer to the group, maybe, it was 3 or 4 people, and he wanted to fill the frame with, 3, 4, 5 people, by him stepping closer, that field of focus would have been a lot shallower and would have been a little bit more critical. So this is where understanding what your camera can do is essential. All right?
By the time I took this batch of pictures, I had taken enough hiking pictures. I had taken enough hiking pictures with this group, and I had taken enough hiking pictures in this place. So in all fairness, I was basing on experience.
Absolutely.
If I were to go out today, Easton, where Dennis does a hike in Easton, Connecticut, I think it's called Easton. I've never been there. If I went on his hike this week there, I would have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah, but depth of field is still depth of field.
Mm-hmm.
A group shot is a group shot. It doesn't matter what location.
These are 5.6, again, because I'm dealing with light and I want it to be at ISO 200.
Okay.
These people are blurred, but I don't care that they're blurred because...
Yes, and why not?
Because they weren't my focus.
That's right. They're not part... Well, they're not part of the story.
Right.
They're extras in your story. They help set the mood, but they're not your principal story. So this is what I mean by choosing your depth of field that's appropriate to your story. All right. Do you need f8 in this particular scene here in order to tell the story that you need to tell? Or can you get away with 5.6? And does 5.6 tell a better story? All right.
To me, and it depends on the audience and depends on the person. To me, what I am trying to tell you is I'm concerned about Wayne. I was concerned about these people, and it's like, yeah, we've got people in the background. We have so many people hiking in this group. There are going to be people in the background.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. But you have to tell one story. You can't tell multiple stories in one shot. It just confuses the situation. Okay. So that's perfect. All right.
Oh, so can I? When he's done, I want to share a picture that I took. It was.
Okay. Let me just show one more. Can I just show one more so I can not share it again? I want to go to when I was in the woods. Let me go to where I was in the woods. Here we are in the woods, and I took this because I wanted to deal with people who were walking.
Yeah.
I bumped the ISO to I kept the f-stop at 5.6, but I bumped the ISO to 800 because in order to not get people being blurry, my aim was to take it ISO up to 600. And these people are blurred, but the people in the front are the important part.
Yeah, but they're blurred because of depth of focus, not because of a slow shutter.
Right. But I don't care that that I have a shallow depth of field. Just one other picture I want to show sometimes, and I don't have the original. I don't know where the original picture is, so I don't know what all the settings were. I purposely took this set, decided to do shutter speed, because they're walking kind of fast down a hill. I did 1/200th of a second on this one. And I may have made this, I either did this at ISO 400 or 800. I'm guessing because of the amount of light here, I did this at 800. So sometimes when people are walking fast, instead of going for an aperture of 5.6 and a high ISO, I'll go for a lower ISO and like 400. 400's good, and I will have the shutter speed of 1/200th of a second, or 1/150th of a second, or maybe even 1/100th of a second.
Yeah.
Depending.
And the other thing, actually, can you pull that image back up?
That last one? Hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Because the one thing about noise is more prevalent in fields of flat color. All right. And this particular image here, you got so much going on with the leaves and the bark. There's a lot of texture. So any high noise is going to get lost in the image, and it's not going to play as significant a role as if it was something that had, flatter areas of color. Okay? So that's the other consideration with noise.
Two other things I need to mention. When I'm in the woods, I make sure I don't get the sky, because I don't want to deal with dark and light. I want just the dark, because if I had the sky and this would be a screwed up picture.
Yeah, but the sky, adding the sky doesn't add anything to the story. So right. I think this is a great composition.
And just one other thing, like I said, I've taken a picture in this place so many times. It's in my mind that when I do this, I'm going to stand there. I'm going to want that water in the background. This is at West Rock, and I have certain places where I will always shoot at a height.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
So, can I share just one picture? Because I like it, but...
How do I unshare? Stop share. There we go. Okay, yeah. I'm finished.
Right. So, now I gotta figure out how to do that.
The green share screen. Yeah.
Share screen. I share this one. Wait a second, let me get them.
Gotta love it.
I can't see it, so.
Yeah.
Let's try this again. So, can you see that picture or no?
I don't see anything yet. There we go.
All right, so you see this picture?
Yes.
Okay, so this was in the middle of the day.
Okay.
In a pretty shaded spot. And you can see I had my settings. I mean, I wanted it kind of quick because I didn't want to get her moving. Right? I wanted to kind of freeze her walking over the water there.
Okay.
I did have X63, so I thought that was pretty, I didn't really care too much about the background. I was focused on her. But my ISO only bumped up to 3200, and I really had to lighten this up. Like, all right.
Okay. Where is the ISO setting? Oh, there it is. 3200.
I know, right? And I had to really lighten this thing up in Lightroom. And I mean, you can see her face is pretty grainy. Fortunately, she's all black.
Was this midday?
Midday. And we were shaded, and I think I have some. These were all I needed. Like this one, even at 100, the 3200 was to get light in here. It's the middle of the day, and I probably could have dropped to something a little bit lower, but again, the raw image of this was very dark.
That seems wrong. That there's something wrong there. Don't you agree, Alan? It's something.
She shouldn't have to do
something's you shouldn't have to be at $3,200, 3,200 ISO for those.
I mean, it was definitely shaded. It was definitely all shaded. I don't know if you've been there, Bill, but it's up in Greylock. So
I've never been there, but I'm sure it is is that Bill Curry? Bill, No,
it's Guy Chris. And then,
that is so cool.
But again, the only way to get this in, and look how slow my shutter was. And again, the picture was dark. I had to really bring it out in Lightroom. And I'm trying to figure out, and maybe that's part of the problem. Something isn't quite right.
You're not using a polarizer filter, are you?
No, I have a ultraviolet UV filter on it.
Oh,
Yeah, that's strange. That's
Especially if she's saying that it was underexposed and she had to lighten it up in dark in light room. That doesn't make sense.
no.
Yeah, let me. You know what? Let me see if I can get.
let me ask you a
Yeah,
question.
that's.
Hey, Donna,
Yeah.
did you have backlighting?
No, it's pretty much all
No,
shade.
that's fairly flat light there.
Yeah.
That's
No, because all these pictures, there's some.
yeah, that's very
That one-
flat indirect light. There's
This one was actually set on program, I think, because someone else used my
6400?
camera, and they didn't want to mess with settings, so they put it on program, and you can see what the program put it at.
400?
Crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts.
And again, and then I went back to shooting, and I think I shot in. I think I was using manual just to play with the settings in general. And like her, here's 3200, 100 seconds at f10, a little bit, a little
at
smaller.
15 millimeter, that doesn't sound right.
They get wide open, and that 2.8 would have taken that ISO down as well.
Right. Yeah. On this one, I realized that I had the aperture pretty narrow.
But even
But if we look at in this one, I was trying to get them. In this area was actually a very dark area, and I probably should have dropped the aperture down.
Yeah.
But I was trying to get the area because it looked like with this all dark back here and this light, it looked like he found a little island for himself, and that's kind of what we were showing. But it didn't come out so well in the picture.
yeah, a little editing could bring that up though.
It's 1/100th of a second, but even still, she shouldn't have to use 3200.
No, there's something going on here. That's everything about this is screaming that there's something wrong here.
So what would be wrong that, like, because I mean the camera's pretty much brand new. I only got it a couple months ago, and
Is it still under warranty, Donna?
it probably is. I mean, did I buy that? I mean, it's got a year warranty or whatever it is, right? I don't know.
Where'd you buy it?
Milford Farm.
Milford Photo? You know
Yeah.
what you should do? I would go in there, I would talk to Jesse, and tell him the settings, and show him the pictures, show him your raw pictures, and just tell him it's not right.
Yeah, and
The menu system might have something. There might be something turned on within the menu system as well. I mean, I don't know Olympus. I know Sony, but I don't know Olympus, so I can't say which menu item might be on. But there might be some setting there that Milford Photo could help her with. Could help you with, Donna.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the my Greylock photos so I can show you the raw picture.
all right. So these are your processed images.
Yeah,
right?
I processed this one, and then
Okay, and then during the process, did you have to bump up the exposure or bump it down?
I don't remember. But here is. Let's see. Okay, so here's the one.
Because that just
Okay, so it's the next one. So this one here is. That's the JPEG. Which one off? Okay, so I'm gonna slide this over here and here. How do I change which screen I'm on?
on the share screen, you'll have to
Unshare and then reshare.
yeah, you just go to share whatever other program you want to share.
Okay, so I gotta find this again.
And what do you use to edit your images?
I just started using Lightroom. Why
Okay.
can't I get this thing? I'm trying to make my. I got like this tiny little box with all you guys in it. I lost my full screen.
Yeah. That's the only problem with screen
now
sharing.
Where are all my little functions to share? Because they disappeared. Oh, here we go. Okay, so new share. And I'm going to share this one. So.
Okay, so this is...
That's the raw photo.
The raw. Okay. All right,
As
so...
you can see, it's much darker than the one I showed you before. It's the same exact image, just much darker.
And where are these settings information for? Oh, right there.
Oh, yeah.
That's
she does not have center metering on, that's for sure.
no, probably evaluative. One, it's a little small on my screen. What are the settings?
I see it as. Go ahead,
F6, 1/60th of a second, 36 millimeters, and ISO 3200.
Even if she was
Yeah,
using evaluative, she shouldn't have to have the ISO at 3200.
Yeah, and this was like midday?
Yeah, I mean, granted it was shaded. We were in the woods.
Yeah, no, I know, but still.
Day.
Yeah, no,
It was probably around
that's nuts.
1:30, 2 o'clock.
That is nuts.
157, actually.
150. Oh yeah, all right there.
Oh, there. Oh, that's right. Yeah, timestamp. Duh.
But so this is my frustration, and I can't figure out why. But now if you tell me that some setting might not be
There, something is affecting your exposure.
Okay.
And you don't have all right. Do you know what exposure compensation is?
Yes, I do.
All right. And your exposure compensation was set to 0 for all of these? Okay.
Well, this one, I would have been shooting this probably on manual. Because I think this was the day I was all on manual.
All right.
So.
Huh. That is bizarre.
And I think this might be the source of all my frustration, is that you guys are all saying that something isn't quite right here. Maybe I'll shoot down to Milton Photo tomorrow or the next day or whatever.
Oh, well, where are you located, Donna?
I'm in Seymour.
Oh, you're next door neighbor. Okay.
Yeah.
Before you go to Milford Photo, let's you and I get together, and let's troubleshoot this.
Okay. Yeah, I would appreciate that.
Because it may be something super simple. All right.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I can't do it tomorrow because I got a job tomorrow that's going to take me till about 3-4 o'clock in the evening. Okay. But I'll get in touch with you after this, and we'll set something up. All right.
I would really appreciate it. Because
all the numbers.
You don't know how frustrated I get.
Oh, yeah, I can tell. But all the numbers that I'm seeing just do not correlate. There's definitely something going on. So
I also wonder if there's a connection between this problem and the problem that Donna is having with waterfalls, because she told me she has used 1/15 of a second. I used 1/15 of a second. There was one particular picture that just it looked really too hot, very hot. Mm-hmm. And at 1/15 of a second, it shouldn't have looked that hot. Maybe Donna, when you go meet with Duck, maybe you should take a couple of your waterfall pictures too.
Oh, if Duck doesn't mind, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I should be able to figure out what's going on just by taking a couple of random shots, looking through. All right. How familiar are you with your menu on that camera?
Somewhat. I can get around it.
Okay. I'll bring. We'll get together, but you'll need to bring your instruction manual just in case.
Okay.
All right.
I can do that. Am I still sharing or not?
Yeah, you are. Go ahead and share. All right. But
Is it leave or unshare?
Unshare.
How do I unshare?
Or stop sharing or whatever that.
Not
Oh, I
sure.
got pause share. Stop share. There we go.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Now I'm
All right.
feeling a little bit better about this.
Okay. Well, I'm going to continue as if your camera behaves
It's right.
properly. All right.
Okay.
Simply because it's good to understand the fundamentals behind what is going on as well. All right. Because it'll help you, moving forward. All right. So we covered, finding your base exposure for when you're facing the light and you're facing the shadow and making the mental note, and using your exposure compensation for those two different scenarios. Correct? All right.
Right.
We also discussed baselines for the type of lens that you use,
Mm-hmm.
that you want to, in order to maximize the lens, you want to keep it above a certain range, right? And it's usually whatever the focal length is, you want to be above that as far
Right.
as shutter speed, okay? Or double that if you're shooting something with action, okay?
Okay.
I just realized that the more telephoto you get, the higher your shutter needs to be in order to stop the action, all right? Especially if you just want to freeze the action, okay? But often than not, I find with any kind of movement, you want a little bit of motion blur just to indicate that they are actually moving, all right?
Right.
Okay. The other consideration is with the raw file. You have to understand that the raw file is going to give you a lot more than what your the display on the back of your camera is going to give you. All right. This is going to lie to you
Yeah. I
all the
noticed.
time, 100%, guaranteed. All right. Every single camera that I've ever held, that LCD has always lied to me. All right. Simply because we're taking a super large file and we're compressing it into a little 3-inch display. So we're going to increase the contrast. We're going to increase the clarity. All right. And we're also going to increase the saturation. And depending on the brightness of the LCD in relation to your ambient light, your exposure is going to be off. Okay, so right off the bat, all the things that you should be worried about, the camera's going to be lying to you about it. All right, that's why yeah. All right, so I usually just, I use the LCD to kind of keep me in the ballpark. Okay, I'm comfortable enough with my camera to know what that ballpark is. All right, but I mainly rely on this just for my composition. Make sure that everything is according to how I want it framed. Okay, but if I really want to nail my exposure, I'm always going to go to the histogram. Okay, so let me go over to this real quick. Charts. Okay. Can everybody see this? All right, and you might
Yes.
need to.
Yes.
You might need to. All right. When it comes to looking at your histogram, all right, and this is going to apply when you're out in the field, as well as when you bring your images into whatever imaging software you're going to be using, whether it's Lightroom, Photoshop, Darktable, GIMP, any of Luminar, or any of those. Okay. Typically, your histogram is going to be divided into 5 sections. Okay, and you can see them here on my screen. we have all the way to the left, we have our blacks, which are the everything from solid black to the dark grays. We have our shadows, which is what we would consider to be anything in dark shadow, all right, which would be all our dark grays, all right. We have our midtones, everything that we consider that 50% gray, and we have our highlights, which are the lighter grays, and then our whites, which are the very, very, very light grays, all the way to 100% white. Okay? And you have to keep in mind that when you look at a histogram, you're looking at luminosity values, not color values. All right? So when something is dark, it's going to be on the left-hand side. When something is light, it's going to be on the right-hand side. And the way a histogram works is you're going to have columns, everything from, in this case, it's considered 0, meaning absolutely no light value, all the way up to 200. Oh, I see. All right. Hold on 1 second. All the way, I'll do it like this, all the way up to 255. All right. So 255 is the most we can get because we're dealing with RGB, meaning red, green, blue. Each one of those channels has 256 values of gray, everything from solid white to solid black. So solid black is 0, meaning 0 light value, to 255 light value, which will push it all the way here to the very edge. So everything here, all right, is our 255 value. Everything on the left-hand side, when it's pressed up against the edge, that's our 0 value. These two edges are the extreme ends, and this is where we lose detail within our images, all right? So everything that is pushed all the way to the left is solid black. No matter what we do, we're never going to regain any kind of information from there. Likewise, anything that's pushed all the way to the right is solid white, and no matter what kind of exposure correction we apply to it, we're not going to get any detail. So for that reason, we want to make sure that we are somewhere within those points. And a lot of times you'll see a histogram that looks like this, okay? And people will tell you that is the ideal histogram. While technically it is not a realistic histogram because not every situation falls into that type of histogram. Because you got to understand, each one of these is, I don't know if I can do a straight line here. Each one of these is a column counting the number of pixels that has that value. So if we were to count all the values of 128, right, we would get a column. And all the values of 127, we would get a column right next to that, and so on. All right, and that creates our histogram. When we have a high contrast scene, such as you would find out in modeled light, for example, where you have bright sun and dark shadow, you may get a histogram that looks like this. Okay? This is not necessarily a wrong histogram because it's appropriate to the scene. This informs me that I am dealing with a high contrast scene. meaning I'm having a lot of information in the shadows and a big spike in my highlights. This can be, the sky peeking through either above the trees or through the trees. Okay. So this would be sky. All right. If anybody's wearing white shirts or white clothing, it could be that as well. All right. This here would be all the trees in shadow. All that green foliage that lies in shadow would be here. All right. So you have to understand what it is you're looking at in relation to how it's being represented. Okay. The key thing here is that you don't want to be pressed up against the edges like that. And this is what I mean by checking your histogram, making sure you're within your exposure range. Instead, if you have a big spike that's like this, it's going to look underexposed in your image. But as long as there is some kind of gap in this area, there is data there that you can manipulate. Okay? Likewise, the same thing here. You may have a big spike there, but as long as we have room at the very, very edge, you're golden. Because we can manipulate this stack here. We can manipulate it this way, make it darker, or we can manipulate it this way and make it brighter according to how we want to edit that scene. All right. So the key points is here and here. You follow that so far? Okay. If you find that you have something like this, okay, this tells me that I am overexposed. All right. Because let me try that again. Oh, wait a minute. What happened? All right. Okay. This lets me know it's overexposed because I have a major gap here. All right. And I am pushed up all the way against the right-hand side. So I can drop my exposure by maybe 2 stops. All right. So -2. Okay. And it's going to shift that whole entire histogram over. And hopefully that will give me a new histogram that looks more like this. All right. Where I have space there and space there. And that is the ideal histogram that you want, because now you know that you are within your exposure range. Now, even if this touches right there and touches right there, the one thing you have to understand that what you are seeing here is a lie. Remember earlier I said your camera lies to you? Well, the histogram is also going to lie, because what you're seeing is a representation of the JPEG processed image that the camera is showing you. You are not seeing the full data that is in the RAW file. And you have to understand that your RAW file will be a little bit further out, left and right. Okay? In the RAW file, you'll be able to, using a RAW processor, whether it's Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom or Luminar, all right, in your Adobe in your raw processor, you can bring this in to this point. All right, it's called setting your white point, and you can take this and bring it in and set your black point so that they are within the exposure range. All right, now I know I'm getting a little bit technical here, but the reason I point this out is because when you have this knowledge, when you are out in the field and you look and you see, oh, I'm kind of pushing it because of what lighting situation I am given, you can now understand that, hey, I have a little bit of leeway in my post-production. So you can relax a little bit and say, okay, it looks bad here in the field, but I know when I bring it home and open it up on my desktop, I will be able to recover a little bit more information than what my camera is showing me. All right, make sense? Okay. All right. So, get used to understanding how your camera presents the information out in the field. All right. And one of the things that I often suggest is spend some time learning your camera. All right. Have your computer ready. Step out onto your back porch. Give yourself find a day that has that high contrast where it's bright sun, but yet there's something in your backyard that is in deep shadow, right? And frame your scene so that if you can, half your image is dark and half your image is bright, and take a shot. And then take a look at that shot on the back of your camera in the LCD, okay? And while you are there, look at your scene, look at the LCD, and then adjust the LCD so it kind of, sort of, as best as you can, make it match what you're seeing. All right? Again, it's going to lie to you, but you can get somewhere in the vicinity of it. All right? And that means just adjusting your LCD brightness. All right? Then use your info button. All right? While you're previewing that image, use the info button, and it's going to cycle through, and it's going to bring up the histogram. And then take a look at the histogram. Look at your scene, look at the LCD, what it's displaying, and then look at that histogram. All right, so now you're going to start making these associations. All right, this scene gives me this histogram. All right, then, while everything's still fresh, bring it inside, open up that image in your raw processor. All right, and what the first thing it's going to do is it's going to take all the settings that come from your camera, and it's going to apply those settings to your image. And then you just got to realize you can ignore everything that the raw processor gives you right off the bat, because you can change those. And you can then say, okay, up in the corners of my histogram, you're going to see these little arrows here. All right? And by default, they're usually grayed out. If the histogram comes close to touching that edge, either in the whites or in the blacks, this little triangle is going to turn white. And this little triangle is going to turn white, okay? I don't have white, but okay? When it's turned white, it means that, hey, I'm pretty close to those white and black points. I'm getting very close to clipping, all right? If they are blue like this, or red like this, all right? They tend to be fairly universal colors for clipping. It means that you have pixels that are clipped, meaning that you have pixels that are at 0 value, no chance of recovering any information. Or if it's on the other end at 255, where they're pure white with no chance of recovering the data from there. You want to make sure you bring those in so that the blue and the red completely disappear. Okay? That's referred to as setting your black and white points. All right? So hopefully that gives you a little bit more insight of what you can do in post-processing with what comes out of your camera. Okay? Now, going back to that situation where you step out onto your back porch, all right? Take a variety of different situations and see how your camera behaves. All right? Because the one thing you're going to find is that your camera is going to behave in the same way during that type of light situation across the board. All right, so if you find yourself in that high contrast lighting situation today and the camera behaves a certain way, a month down the road when you're in that same light, high contrast situation, your camera is going to behave the same way. So you know that if you're in a high contrast situation and you need to shift your exposure +1, -1, or maybe a third, all right, you know that that's going to be across the board. And you're now learning your camera a lot better. So that when you find yourself in that same bright midday sun with high contrast, and you know that the meter's going to give you a very specific exposure, and you say, past experience has shown me that the camera gives me too hot of an exposure, meaning it's too overexposed, I need to tell the camera, drop it down by a third, drop it down by 2/3, or whatever it is, okay? So now this becomes the default setting that you go to. So in a high contrast, you shift over to aperture priority, you immediately put a -2/3 value exposure compensation on it right off the bat. And now that's one less thing you have to worry about. But it means learning your camera. All right? So, yes, there's homework. Yes, it takes effort. Yes, it takes some thinking. But,
Practice.
you know,
It takes practice.
it takes practice. Absolutely.
I mean, the more
Right.
you go out and shoot, the more you're going to learn your camera. I mean, I might go out with a particular purpose in mind initially, but once I get out there, I create a challenge for myself, something different that I don't normally do.
Yes.
Whenever I go, that type of thing. Just to learn something new, not that I don't know what to expect when it comes out or anything like that. But it's not what I initially went out to shoot.
Yeah, and that's perfect because that's how you grow as a photographer. If you constantly challenge yourself, you're constantly getting better. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I've been going out a lot doing it like this picture. I took about 10 or 15 pictures just last night for myself just to see different settings, to see what I get. And I do that a lot. But if something is kind of screwed with my settings, that might be why it's coming out so well.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll figure it out.
Actually, that image that you got, what are the settings for that image?
This one right here?
Yeah. Do you know it offhand?
Yeah, I'll tell you in a second.
That should be ISO 100. That should be, let's see, maybe at F8. You should be at 1/50th of a second.
Actually, it was at 160th of a second. F18 Oh, this one I used my right angle lens.
Okay, yeah, that's
so
fine.
168 f18, 9 millimeters, ISO 64.
ISO 64.
Right, but again, I think might have had to lighten this one up.
Do you have? You don't have auto ISO set on yours, do you?
I was not using auto ISO yesterday, and usually I don't use the auto ISO because what I found when I'm in the woods is it's always too low. It's never enough.
Yes. All right. Now, here's a question. Okay, are you setting your ISO on the camera, but not checked the menu, whether you have auto ISO set in the menu? Because if you have auto ISO set in the menu, sometimes that doesn't quite display properly. It doesn't let you know that it's on auto.
Okay, let me see what we got here. Let me look at my menu. I'm pretty sure it's not.
There should be a separate menu setting for auto ISO.
There is. On the menu, like in the what do they call it? The quick menu. It's got always.
Yeah,
not. It does have, like right now it's on ISO low. I almost never put it on ISO low.
Right. Okay. So in that menu, that's where you normally set your ISO. You can set it to 100, 200, 300, right?
Right. But then when I'm shooting.
Oh, wait. Separate from that menu, there should be another menu item for auto ISO override.
Let me look for that. I'll check that one out.
Yeah, because I've encountered people who swear up and down that they don't have auto ISO because they're checking where you're checking now. It says, look, it says I'm setting it at 100. My camera is showing me that it's set at ISO 100. But yet, in that other menu item, it has the auto ISO override.
Okay,
so you need to check that.
Yeah, I have to look to see if I can find where that is. But I will. I'll definitely check that.
All right, because that has played so much havoc with so many people. Why they have that setting, I will never understand. Because it's what?
I love it. That's all I do. I want to ISO. Instead of 100 as a zero, sometimes
and you don't find that it messes with your exposure?
When I shoot my bird, whether it's a sparrow or a blue heron or an eagle or an osprey, I'm going for a light blue in the background all the way up to the right side. Okay, and I want to be told that my 70 feet at 1,000 seconds at least. I'm wide open at 5.6, so it's 100 millimeters zoom, and I don't care where the ISO goes. Okay, I want that shot.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Denoise, yeah.
And it starts to up for me. I want that shot or look cross place, dabbling it out on the side, or
right. But what I'm saying is, are you setting the camera to auto ISO yourself?
Yeah.
All right, and then your auto ISO override is set to off, correct?
No, it's set to off. Everything's set to off. And I set my range. I have a range I'm not sure about any other issues, but I have a range I can set on that auto ISO, and if it's right sunlight, it's going to go down to ISO 100.
Right.
And then it's like, because if I move around and I'm shooting a marshy area or something like that, a duck stop coming down the high, it goes up to 800 to 1,000 by itself.
Right.
Okay, I'm more concentrating on the focus and
And that doesn't interfere with your exposure compensation?
no.
Huh.
Yeah, it doesn't interfere with it.
Yeah, I was going to say, because my experience with others is that it does mess with that exposure compensation. And that's what I find frustrating. Because if I'm trying to tell the camera to go darker and that auto ISO setting says, screw you, I'm not going to listen to you, that just makes it frustrating for me as a photographer.
Yeah, I mean, granted, the ISO is set real high. It normally doesn't go way up there, but it's available in case it needs.
Right. Yeah, but my concern is just being able to override it.
Yeah.
And as the way I look at it as a photographer, I want as much control as possible. All right. And if you take that override, you're basically taking all the power away from me.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, here again, when I'm doing all this business stuff, I'm locked in. I'm doing all straight manual anyway, so I want my shutter speed where it is at least 2,000 seconds. Okay, my lens is wide open anyway. There's just let one look right in.
Okay.
And the background is going to go blurry. I'm after that blue heron that's between me and that the edge of the wood type thing. That's where my focus is on it.
Right.
So I'm wide open anyway. So I'm still, as far as I'm concerned, I'm still in trouble.
Okay. All right.
So I have these settings, and there's one that's called ISO auto set, which sounds like a lot of things.
Yeah.
I can set an upper limit and a default.
Yes.
The upper limit is 3,200, and right now it's set for that, and the default is 500, which I can change if I need to. But there's no way to turn that off. But then right below that, there's something called lowest SS setting.
That's shutter speed.
Okay, so alright, so that's that. But
Yeah,
then
yeah,
there's
but you
another one that says ISO auto, and it says all. And then the only other option is PA and S. So it's either, so I don't know, because it's on all. Is it ISO autoing and that's why it's going?
That may be, yeah, that's, so remember
but
where.
But there's no way to turn
yeah,
off
but
ISO auto.
remember how to get to that, because that's something I'm going to check.
Okay, so I'm not going to change anything on it.
Yeah.
I'll leave it where it is. Yeah. And you can look at that. But it doesn't look like there's a way to turn off the ISO auto. It's like, it's either all or PSNA.
Okay.
There's no none. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that. But,
okay.
There's something wonky going on with your camera, so.
Glad to hear that. It's not just that I can't shoot a picture.
It's all you. Forget it. You can't. Throw it out. Sell it.
Take the camera away. Don't give it to her.
Give it up. We don't need the competition. Give it up.
Yeah, right.
Oh my God, that's funny. All right. Any questions on any of the information I covered so far, though? I know I gave you quite a bit.
No, it's all good.
Yeah. All right. So I'm just gonna share. Where's my Lightroom? Okay, so I'm just gonna share a couple of shots that I took Saturday at an event. All right, and this particular shot, and I'm not gonna share my screen because it's just gonna slow everything down. But if you want to just enlarge my video, that's all you need. All right, in this particular case, we had very heavy overcast skies. It was raining, so well, you were in Seymour, so you know what the weather was like. This was in Oxford, right next to you. So if you remember what the morning looked like Saturday morning, this is it. there were some heavy cloud banks. All right, so I was shooting at, because of that darkness, I immediately put my camera on ISO 400 without even thinking about it. Okay. Simply because I know the sky was robbing me of light. Okay. And so this shot was, okay, I need to find an exposure that's going to allow me to get both the sky and the ground. Okay. And if you notice that the ground's a little bit on the dark side, and the sky is more, not quite very bright, but not quite middle gray. All right. And if we look at the histogram up here in the corner, all right, you can see that valley. All right. We have the high peaks here all the way on the left-hand side. That's all my ground. Okay, everything below that halfway point down, that's this massive area of dark shadow. And you can see that I am not clipping at all, right? And this spike that is just a little to the right of the middle, that's my sky. That's this, slightly lighter middle gray, right? And then, of course, we have this little bump down here. That's all these white chairs all the way in the foreground, all right? All of those are down here. And that's the thing that we have to understand as a photographer, okay? If we look at these chairs, we as humans, when talking about these chairs, we label it as white, right? Because that's the vernacular. But if we were to actually, let me go into the, right? If I click on my point here, all right, these white chairs are reading at about 70% gray, 70% lightness. Okay, so 100% would be pure white. Okay, so 50% would be middle gray. So you can see that these are just above that middle gray. Even though we call it white, they aren't white. They're actually a very dark, or a very, very light gray. Okay. Even this little section up here. All right. This little sliver, this little triangle of light here. Okay. That's the brightest point of my image. That's reading at 90%. So it's not even, it's 10% shy of being pure white.
Doug, how do you know it's 90%?
So in Lightroom, in the develop module, if I go over here for my white balance,
yes,
right, I click on that little eyedropper, all right, and if I just hover over it,
yes,
okay, right below, I don't know if you can see, right below in that grid,
yeah,
right below are three values, RGB, and it says 86.9, 86.8, 84.1. Okay. All right. Those are my percentage values of luminosity for each one of those channels. So what I do is I just look at the average of those numbers, right? So in the brightest section there, it's 90.2, 90.0, and 87.0. So I just round it to 90%.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
So that's telling me that I have 10% more, 10% leeway before I blow it out. So I can manipulate this image a lot before I blow that part of the sky out to 100% white. And even then, if it goes to 100% white, does it really matter based on the composition and the elements in this image? If that were to go to 100% white, would it matter? Actually, let me go ahead and reset that. Okay. All right. Actually, if I just let me zoom in. All right. If I just hold the cursor over it, I want you to look at these. Well, they're not here, right? My histogram right underneath where it says 24 millimeter and at 5.6. Okay. You're going to see that as I hover over, it changes. And those are all my values. All right. At 90%, 9%, 82%. All right. Depending on where I go.
Are you hovering?
I'm just hovering.
White balance again?
No, in this case, I'm just, the hand tool is hovering. Okay. But it's going to show it to you in that far corner, right below the histogram. Okay. All right. So that's a quick way of checking your values. All right. So now if I go into the shadow area, all right, the shadow area, you can see it's 2.6, 1.9, 1.3. So if I average those out, all right, I'm getting about an average of 2%. Okay, where 0% is 100% black. All right, 0% means zero light, no light. Okay, so obviously, this whole bank of buildings is dark. Does it make sense for me as the photographer to make those darker? Absolutely not. All right. I will want to brighten those up in order to show a little bit more detail. Okay. And because those are not at 0, I know that there's enough data there that when I amplify my signal, so if I were to take it from 2% to, let's say, 10% black, there's enough data there that allows me to make that shift and still have detail in the shadows. Okay? How do I do that? I just take my shadows and hide it out. All right? And now there, my 2% is now at about 5%. Okay? In that little doorway, previously it was reading about 2%. Now it's about 5-6%. Okay? So I brought it up 4 percentage points. And if we look at it, all right, now it opened up those shadows quite nicely. So I only need to make a very small adjustment in order to really open up those shadows. Okay. And of course, if I want to make my sky lighter or darker, I know I have that leeway because no part of that bright sky was at 100% light. Okay. So I can bring my highlights down, all right, and make that really, really gloomy sky. Okay. I can even open up my shadows a little bit more. Okay. And maybe even add a little bit of coolness. All right. So all of this is done in post to correct for whatever lighting issues you have out in the field. All right. And this is why it's important to come in and edit your images. All right. Don't be one of those people that says, oh, whatever the camera captures, that's what I'm going to present because, that's how the camera saw it. He says, no. All right? Don't do that. Because every image needs to be processed. The camera is going to lie to you 100% of the time. All right? And the camera has limitations as to how it captures light. All right? And one of those issues is that we are dealing with a photovoltaic sensor, meaning that it only activates when light hits it. The more light that hits it, the more active those photocells become. And that's what's going to give us these bright pixels, all right, up in here. These pixels are going to fill up faster than our shadow area, okay? And this is why we get high contrast areas, because the light part is going to influence that photovoltaic sensor a lot faster and a lot more than the shadow areas. The shadow areas are just going to creep along at its own slow little pace because it's starving for light. There's not enough light coming there. So it's just going to be the beggar out on the street, give me more. All right? While the light, the pixels that are in the bright area are like, I am basking in the sun. I got all the wealth I need. Look at all this light. All right? So there's a discrepancy there already built in to the hardware. All right? And that's what gives us these really funky valleys, all right, in our histogram. All right? When we understand that, we can then make conscious decisions out in the field and say, okay, I want to make sure that I am away from that left edge enough with my shadows so that if I need to bring them up a little bit, I'm going to regain some of that shadow detail. But I have to understand that when I shift that away from the left, I am going to be shifting towards the right. All right? So looking at the histogram, you say, okay, well, I don't want to go too far to the right because then I'm going to start losing detail there. So you have to find that happy medium. All right? And this is why looking at the histogram is important, because sometimes your exposure is not dead center at 0. Your exposure may be -1/3 or -2/3 or maybe even a full stop negative, okay? Because you're compensating for that discrepancy in the way the sensor collects data, right? Hopefully that made a little sense to you. And I probably just fried brains. Did I fry brains? I think I fried brains. I'm not hearing any feedback.
You can't do that.
I know. I'm trying to watch myself from doing that, but I get carried away sometimes.
Thank you.
All right. Any questions?
I have one question. I'll make
Sure.
it quick. I was looking at buying a used lens from B&H, and I saw the price for a macro lens. I don't have a macro lens. 50 millimeter. I know
good.
some people have 100 millimeter.
Yeah, I have both the 50 and the 100 macro.
Okay. What would buying a 50 millimeter macro lens buy me? I don't take too many flowers, but maybe I would like to at this point a lot of big flowers.
Well,
Back at that one. Okay, why are you laughing, Cynthia?
No, that was actually me too. I was laughing.
Okay, yeah, guys aren't flower guys. I know that.
No, it was just funny that he said maybe I'd like to at this point. Just jumping on the bandwagon. Because other people do it.
I know that. It's like, okay,
Yeah. It's the way we grow, right? So,
That's it. Yeah. And you know what? I love taking pictures of flowers. One of my favorite methods of taking flower pictures is having them backlit with the light, with the sun directly behind them, so it comes through the petals. I love those shots. I don't know how many shots I've taken where I'm actually pointing into the sun with my flower shots. All right. So to answer your question, the benefit of a macro lens is the ability to focus closer to your subject. That's all it does. All right. So, for example, with a 100 millimeter lens, typically you have to be about 18 to 24 inches away from your subject. Okay. So that means if you want to get a close-up of the honeybee inside the middle of the flower, in order to get that focus point, you have to be about 2 feet away and then rely on cropping in order to zoom into that bee. Make sense?
Okay.
All right. With a macro lens, I can focus at 4 inches. So I can get 4 inches away
4 inches away from the flower.
from the bee.
Okay.
So in essence, what I've done is I've cropped out all the unneeded parts of the flower just by physically moving into the flower.
Okay.
All right. That's the biggest benefit of a macro lens.
Expensive tubes can help as well. I mean,
They do, but yes, but they also rob you of light.
And it's more money than I want to spend anyway.
Well, yeah. Well, macro tubes theoretically, yeah. Well, you can get the cheap macro tubes that it's going to put you in complete manual, or you can get the ones that are digitally linked, which are going to be a little bit pricier, but still cheaper than getting a lens. All right.
I think if I were to do this, I'd rather get the lens. After I went into LPwD, I asked them, they gave me a price, and they told me how to do it. It's like, I don't want to go through all that. And I would rather spend the money on the lens bill.
Yeah.
This is a used lens, and it's a good price.
Yeah. It's a 50 millimeter. What aperture?
Yeah, it's still out there.
What, 1.8?
I think it was 1.8. But I wouldn't want to shoot at 1.8, right?
Not up close. You're gonna. No. Yeah. That's
I have a 50
yeah.
1.8. I have a 50 millimeter. Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Extension tubes is the least expensive way, but it's a little bit more flubbing out in the field, in my opinion. But as with anything else, like Alan said, when you practice, it becomes second nature. Then at that point, it becomes easy.
And the extension tubes, I can use them on any of my lenses. I'm not stuck with a 50. I can put it on my 70 to 400.
That's true.
And it just makes my I focus closer. I play on focus closer with that lens. So the extension tube usually come in a set of 3.
Yep.
And you can mix and match. You use all 3. Use one. Use the other. Use the other. It's just a little bit more fun to play with. And the auto,
the connection. Yeah.
Connection for your camera aren't all that expensive though.
True. They're not as expensive as getting a lens. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, totally not.
Yeah. So, hopefully that answers your question, Bill.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Donna is probably now drooling under her desk because I fried her brain.
No, it was actually very informative, very good. And I think the highlight was something is messed up. So, but no, I'm really glad we got to that. But all this other stuff is really good. I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So they're using the stuff. Some of it I've used a little bit of. But I've just been super frustrated with the results. You should where it is.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Cynthia, a lot of this is probably familiar, right? Oh,
It does. And I want you to know I haven't changed all my camera settings like you told me to do. And already it's like easier instead of like clicking a million things. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
So So tomorrow, hopefully gonna go out for, a good portion of the day and just do whatever. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome, yeah. Yeah, you just gotta use the camera and get that muscle memory built up. That's
it.
You always keep your tripod in your living room or wherever you are. I've never seen your tripod by a fireplace before.
So this is my studio, so at the end of the week, I just throw stuff in there and decide, okay, am I sewing today or am I doing some stuff? Yeah, so there's lights underneath the table. Yeah, just whatever. So,
awesome.
There's fireplaces in almost every room in this house because it's very old. So.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Anybody else got any questions? Bob, Bonnie, anybody? We're good?
I'll say mine today.
All right. Well, don't forget, if you are a Patreon, hopefully you'll join me next Monday. The link is you should have received the link in your email. Other than that,
Someone you've given before, Doug?
yes.
Okay. There is a password. Okay. I know I had trouble before with the password.
Yeah. If you click on the link, it should automatically fill in that password for you.
Okay, good.
So. Awesome. Thank you guys for another wonderful session. You guys always make it awesome for me. I really appreciate it.
Hopefully next week I'll have some baby pictures.
That would be great.
Oh,
I want to
yeah.
see those.
Okay.
Baby was due yesterday, but she's already a day late. First grandchild.
You're first, huh?
First, yeah. You have how many? Do you have now?
I have 4 grandkids.
I had only one.
Bill, I thought you were going to bring in your baby.
My baby photo.
I never clarified it. I said, oh, is that the assignment that I didn't hear about?
He'll break the internet.
Nice week, everybody.
All right. Alan, thank you. Good night, everybody. I really, really appreciate it. We'll see ya.
Thank you for watching Learning Photography with Duck. Brought to you in association with Milford Photo, your local full-service camera store. Located in downtown Milford, Connecticut, Milford Photo offers you a personalized shopping experience. From the latest camera gear to printing and framing services. And, of course, educational workshops to teach you the finer aspects of photography. Don't forget to tell them Duck sent you.